Hello and welcome to a special interview for the Sustainable Fashion Workshop. I have with me a very special guest and a person I truly admire, Mr. Satya Tripathi, all the way from India. Satya S. Tripathi is the Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet, a development economist, lawyer, and change maker with over 40 years of varied experience. Mr. Tripathi is the Chancellor of the Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences, the world's largest academic institute dedicated exclusively to indigenous people and cultures. He is also a senior distinguished fellow on the innovative finance at the World Agroforestry Center. He has served with the UN for more than 2 decades in key positions across the planet, and most recently, the UN Assistant Secretary General, head of New York office at the UN Environment Program. His other strategic engagements with the UN include the head of Human Rights Investigation for the UN in post-war Bosnia and the chair of committees of laws, treaties, administrative matters for the UN-mediated Cyprus unification talks in 2004. He was also very much involved with the UN recovery coordination for the Aceh and NIAS, where he facilitated international cooperation and funding of over US $7 billion for the post-tsunami recovery efforts in support of the government and affected populations. And as the executive head of the UNORCID, the UN System Office established by the UN Secretary General in 2011 to facilitate the implementation of US $1 billion partnership between Indonesia, Norway, and other stakeholders. Mr. Tripathi was instrumental in establishing the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility in Indonesia in 2016 and the Sustainable India Finance Facility in 2017 to leverage private finance for public good at mega scale to achieve transformational social and environmental impact for millions of people in developing countries. He has previously served on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Forests. Mr. Tripathi, thank you so much for joining us. And it's a true honor for having you here.
Thank you for having me, Runa.
Mr. Tripathi, I'm going to go back to an article that you wrote recently for the Forbes. And you have served on the World Economic Forum on the Global Advisory on Forests. And your most recent article, you struck a very positive chord by saying that India could be a global leader in giving back a nature-positive economy by repurposing and supporting India's 120 million shareholder farmers to regenerative agriculture and the much required impact for 2030. Well, we're all aware of the fact that even though India is one of the most arable lands, we have farmers who are struggling because there's a lack of timely forecasting, there's inefficient supply chains, there is the use of commercial farming practices, and you also have soil that is suffering because of over-tillage, pesticide use, and of course the stubble burning that happens twice a year and affects the north of India and then even goes across into Pakistan. So for all of us listening, can you tell us how regenerative farming could build back a nature-positive economy?
Well, I think to understand that, one has to see it in the Indian context. And of course, the Indian context is not very much different from the global context. But the Indian context is, as much as it is similar with the global context, it is also very unique. Unique in the sense that there are 120 million smallholder farmers that mostly do not own the land, and some do, but mostly they're doing sharecropping for someone else. And given the fact that they don't own the land, they can't do really something meaningful with it because their relationship with the land is from one crop cycle to the other. So the landowner can easily tell them, hey, I want to use somebody else for this particular crop cycle. So that's one big challenge for India. The other challenge is that there is great levels of distress among farmers. And this comes from, as you have rightly pointed out, inefficient supply chains, lack of market access, and that then results in a lot of farmer suicides. There have been studies, very authoritative studies by Oxfam and others, that tell us that close to 100,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last few decades. That's not a very happy situation. No one wants to kill themselves when they can do something better with their lives, more purposeful, more meaningful. So when that happens, then as policymakers, as people interested in a brighter and a shining future for India, we really need to look within. And as someone wise has said this very powerfully, that the most adventurous journey is the journey within. So instead of looking outside, how India has been a victim of the climate profligacy of developed countries, that has brought us to where we are now in terms of the 420 parts per million carbon concentration in the atmosphere, or for that matter, the fact that we have already spent more than 90% of the carbon budget for the planet, that the budget that will keep us within 2 degrees Celsius of global warming is 2,900 gigatons. And we are way past 2,600 already. So we just have 10% of the budget left to turn course, and that budget should have been used by 2100, not by 2021. And that's how bad the situation is. So that's the outside part. Let's focus on the inside. What's happening in India? I personally do not believe, I didn't believe that when I was an activist before I went into back into the UN as an Assistant Secretary General, and I have been part of these conversations at the UN a lot, and I have always highlighted this, that we need to find a different narrative. And that narrative is not mitigation, because mitigation is asking the victims to help those that have caused the situation to start with. India's annual per capita emissions is under 1.9 tons, whereas best scientists tell us that the global ideal per capita footprint should be somewhere around between 2 to 2.1 tons per capita. So India is under that threshold of ideal footprint. So, and the global average is somewhere between 4 to 5 tons per capita. If you take the United States, the global, their annual average is 16 tons per capita. So it's a very difficult argument for the Indian Prime Minister, or for that matter, any public leader in India, to make that even though as a country or as a people, we are under the ideal average, we need to act to mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change. Anybody with half a brain will ask, why? If I'm under the ideal average, then I still have somewhere to go to catch up with the ideal average. Why do you want me to act? So that can't be the argument. That I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't act. What I'm saying is that the narrative does not serve the cause. And so we need to move from this whole mitigation conversation that has been going on for 30 years. Now even everybody accepts, actually, there has been too little money flowing into adaptation. There's too little conversation around adaptation. And we keep telling scope 1, scope 2, and all these mitigations, and who'll avoid what. But what is more important is who can bring back what. And then in there, India's leadership lies. India needs to act on climate adaptation for the contaminated water. Literally almost everybody who drinks water. Most recently, the state of Orissa, the chief minister announced that in the holy city of Puri, which is the reigning deity of the Oriya culture, Jagannath. So there, they managed to provide tap water that you can actually drink straight from the tap. And that was national news, which is sad. As much as it is a very, very good thing to do, and hats off to the chief minister of Orissa and the government there for doing this for their people. But the fact that it makes national news is a sad news, because that tells us how contaminated is the water we consume.
Correct.
How polluted is the air we breathe. India has the dubious distinction of having 21 of the worst 30 cities on the planet in terms of air pollution. 21. And you can take, and most of them are in the top of the list. And then the chemically saturated toxic soil that we draw our sustenance from. In the state of Punjab, there's a train that goes to the neighboring state of Rajasthan, which has a big cancer hospital. And that train, actually, it has been well documented by very many well-reputed photographers and videographers. And it's on YouTube and everywhere else one can find and look at it. There's a train full of wailing family members and others that make that journey every day, because they have to take their family and friends to the cancer hospital in the neighboring state, because Punjab's lands are all chemically saturated. The pesticides sell there as you would sell toffees. And actually, pesticide companies offer you incentives. If you sold 10 cans, you get 2 for free. For what?
Unbelievable.
So that's what is going on. So that's the challenge. And that's what we really need to turn back the clock on. And that's where India's experimentation with natural farming, which is more popularly known globally as regenerative agriculture, which is not organic farming, by the way. Doesn't use compost and other things. It's a process of bioinoculation. And the women farmers of Andhra Pradesh state in India that have organized themselves into these self-help groups of 10 women each. And there's close to 1 million such self-help groups in the state, which is an amazing experiment in and of itself. But beyond that, they have taken that massive organizing of social cohesion and then turned that into natural farming. So now these self-help groups are getting into natural farming. As of today, they've already converted 1 million farmers to regenerative agriculture. And they intend to convert the entire 6 million farmers. Now, given the success there and the results it has produced, the input cost drops by about 80%. So no farmer ever needs to commit suicide because they don't need to take unsustainable loans for their crops. And their children can get the best of healthcare. They can go to the best of schools. That's prosperity at the grassroots. And looking at that, all the stakeholders are now coming together, led by Niti Aayog, which is, I would translate, you can call it the Planning Commission of India, which is a national government body. NITI, N-I-T-I, stands for National Institution of Transforming India. So Aayog is the commission. So that's what it is. So led by Niti Aayog, they are now trying to bring together the activists and the champions and the government in every state of India. So imagine if 120 million smallholder farmers cultivating roughly 160 million hectares of cropland switch to natural farming. We're talking about emissions avoidance in terms of the fossil fuels that are required to produce the fertilizers, the fossil fuel inputs that go into the fertilizer itself, and then, of course, the transportation emissions that carrying the fossil fuel from fertilizers from different parts of the world into India, because India imports roughly 50% of what it uses. So there's global emissions, there's local emissions within the country, and then, of course, the massive public health hazard that causes numerous ailments, including aggravated ones, such as endocrine disruptors for the children who eat the chemically laced food, and of course, cancer and other serious ailments. And last but not the least, chemically saturated agriculture needs a lot of water. We are already seeing that in Andhra Pradesh. As an average, and this is backed by substantive research, this is not anecdotal evidence. On an average, 50% of the water uses is saved as opposed to conventional agriculture. And how did we find that out? Because in most parts of Andhra Pradesh, people use something called lift irrigation, which basically means you make a bore well in your land and you draw the water out from, at some point of time, water was available at 20 feet under. Now it's available at 150 feet, 200 feet under, because it keeps dropping and dropping, thereby completely denuding the soil of any moisture and the soil erosion and everything dying with it, all the microbial life that sustains plant life in soil. So what we've seen, and now we have we've engaged KPMG and others to do even more substantive studies, that there is 50% electricity savings already. So that's a very powerful proxy indicator, because this electricity was being provided for free by the government to the farmers. So that emission as well, apart from the fact that when you use 50% less water, the groundwater will keep recharging itself.
Correct.
And in a few years' time, we will have Mother Nature back to where it ought to be.
Correct.
So I think that's why this presents a powerful opportunity for India and a powerful opportunity for the world to support India in doing this.
Correct. So you would be having these cluster programs that could be carried out by a certain farm and then be spread across the country. Is that what the idea would be?
So the idea currently is in Andhra Pradesh, what they do is, it is not by any perverse incentives. There are no subsidies involved for the farmers. So what happens is that they do two things which are very powerful, I think. One is that the farmers themselves choose something called a master farmer. You know, somebody that has remained steadfastly adherent to the principles of natural farming, that has shown great results. So then they are chosen as master farmers. Then they are paid 5 times the fair wages they would make if they were in their own place. And then they are transplanted into another district, not another village. We don't want them to come back to their homes in the evening. So it's another district so that they actually go and live there. This farming is not a 10 to 5 job. So they go with their families, they live in another part of the state, and there the government makes land available on lease to them, so that in the middle of a village, they take a 5-acre plot maybe, and then they do multiple crops for the entire village to watch. So if I was a farmer and I'm watching somebody doing natural farming right next to my land, and I would have spent 5 times as much and growing chemically laced food, and the next farm is doing the same thing with 20% the inputs, with lush green fields and producing nutrient dense food, I would feel stupid at the end of the crop cycle. And then I walk up to them and then ask, hey, you know, how can we collaborate? That's how it happens. So it's purely through a demonstration model. It is the world's largest farmer to farmer extension. These are not government officials telling people how to do their jobs. They're farmers telling farmers.
I think that's excellent, yeah.
The first crop cycle, the farmer converts, but not the entire land. So maybe 15–20% of their land, they will try this and see how it works. Because we also realize that the resilience of a farmer is only from one crop cycle to the next. They don't have the reserves. God forbid something goes wrong, they cannot afford it because their families' lives depend on it. They'll starve literally if they don't produce. So when you're doing it in partnership with them, you advise them, hey, don't do 100%, do 20%, do 15%, see how it works for you. And then by the next crop cycle, they get to 50% by themselves. And by 3 or 4 crop cycles, they're 100% converted, both farmer and farm. So that's how it happens.
Correct. And this could probably also help a lot with the stubble burning that we see because of the paddy fields and the farmers complaining that we don't have water. But if you have a head farmer who knows what crops to kind of grow at that point and to kind of give the knowledge, then you can get the word spread across. And of course, it's better.
The stubble burning challenge is not so much in Andhra Pradesh, but it's mostly in the northern states of India. But you're right, it could avoid the problem of stubble burning because in Andhra Pradesh, what they do is everything that is not harvested. So if you talk about rice paddy, the grains are harvested, of course, but the stubble is then left on the ground.
Correct.
So that becomes the mulch that covers the ground, retains the moisture. Something extraordinary is happening in Anantapur district in Andhra Pradesh, where they are doing something called the pre-monsoon dry sowing. So they don't wait till the summer comes and goes and the land is completely parched. So they actually do they have moved it up by a few weeks. And We are seeing extraordinary results already. About 100,000 hectares. It's like a green oasis in a parched land, literally. And that's possible because farmers are listening to themselves instead of listening to conventional practice, which basically tells you you wait till it rains and then you cultivate. The problem with that is that if rains do not come, summer has already come and gone. With it, it has taken all the moisture. But if you start just ahead of monsoon, ahead of the summer or the bad summer months or weeks, you actually have moisture still there. Nothing prevents you to cultivate. So if you get monsoons, fantastic. But if you don't, you actually have very strong plants already existing when summer comes. So they can actually take care of themselves because they are not in a fragile state where they need all the land moisture to survive. So I think that's an extraordinary innovation that these farmers have brought about, and everybody's looking at it now very carefully.
Definitely. And would this also help in carbon sequestration, this sort of farming?
So the way we can deal with the 2,600 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere, two ways.
You're always so good with numbers. I have to learn that from you.
and if you want to deal with it, then you have two ways. One is avoidance, of course, which is you do things in a better way. Let's say you avoid fossil fuels and you go to renewables. Of course, there's a lot of critics about solar because they say, well, you're producing the panels with dirty power. There's some sense in that argument, but that will slowly go away. You got to start somewhere. But the operational carbon emissions from solar or renewables is pretty much zero. So that's what we need to focus on. You can't have everything changed, So let's say a person is unwell or a diabetic or something, you start with not consuming sugar.
Right.
Or regulating it. And then when you do that and you start walking or running and exercising, and then, in a few years' time, you'll be a healthy person needing no external supplements or inputs. But you can't do both at the same time. So that is why we need to focus on the operational emissions, which is fantastic with renewables. And then, of course, once you have renewables taking over the entire planet, of course, the solar panels will also be produced with a renewable energy. But you can't say on day one, I want everything. It doesn't work like that. And then create these false binaries. We're saying, it may be clean operationally, but in terms of the capital expenditure of carbon, it's bad for the planet. Well, sorry, coal is equally bad or even more worse, So that's what it is. And in that sense, what is happening is, so that's avoidance, So you bring about more fuel efficient vehicles, and new technology and all. But there's sequestration, there's trees. Now soil itself holds or has the capacity to hold. It doesn't hold at this time. We've taken it away and put it in the atmosphere. All the carbon you see in the atmosphere, a lot of it came from land use and land use change. So the moment you switch from soil chemistry to soil biology, then the soil starts pulling back the carbon and holding it itself. Soil moisture improves, soil organic content improves, soil microbial life improves, and suddenly that ecosystem comes thriving. A straight reverse example would be if you look at Siberia, the permafrost, which is holding billions of tons of methane under the ground because of the climatic conditions there, because it is cold and because the biomass, the detritus that is inside and is producing all the methane isn't coming out. But the moment the temperature increases, and now you're seeing all these blowouts in the Siberian landscape, because with increased temperature, the methane gas expands under heat, and then it's throwing out the earth, creating massive craters across the Siberian landscape. So it works both ways. So you can hold it or you can send it out.
Correct.
And this presents the greatest opportunity we have in improving soil organic carbon, and the realistic opportunity, not just for carbon in the atmosphere and greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, but also SDGs. Because when you do this, you are reducing farmer distress, you're reducing the public health crisis. We recently did a study, you'll be surprised, in 93 bio villages. Let me explain bio villages. These are villages that have completely switched to natural farming. There's not a single inch of land in the village area that does chemical farming anymore. So there are about 93 villages in the north of Andhra Pradesh. I was myself there when they announced and launched that. At that time, I was the Assistant Secretary General with the UN. So I was there a few months ago. And extraordinary to meet these women farmers from indigenous communities, what we in India call tribal communities, and how proud they were of their accomplishments. And then mind you, these are people that have never seen the front gate of a primary school. And then the kind of wisdom they bring into the conversation makes me ashamed of all the high-flying degrees I got from the best of universities. And we get around in these hallowed chambers of the UN and all these conference rooms, and we keep talking ad nauseum about managing risks. Oh, this is not going to work for us. This is not going to work for them or our investors or our clients. And here are very poor women farmers from the tribal communities truly telling us where wisdom is. And they are willing to switch practices they have done for decades. They're willing to take that risk when their life depends on what they grow every crop cycle. Shame on us.
Yeah, true. That brings me to another question with your natural farming. We know that India has the world's largest cropland. You could correct me if I'm wrong. But when it comes to
not the largest cropland, but the largest in.
Would it be arable land?
You know, the US would have the largest cropland.
Okay, in terms of
but a lot of it is never cultivated.
Correct.
So I mean, it's the potential of the India is about close to 180 million hectares, but the US is way bigger. Yeah.
So, but when it comes to natural farming, we always hear about animals asked to, like the livestock, asked to kind of mimic the wild herbivores, because they graze in one place and then they move to the other place. So then that leaves behind the urine and the dung and the mulch and everything. I was just thinking, do you think in this kind of a natural farming situation, because India also has a large amount of livestock, from cattle to sheep to buffaloes, do you think we could integrate the farmers with the livestock keepers to kind of create something of the sort? Or is it like... No,
natural farming actually is in harmony with both. So the biosubstances that the farmers use is made up of cow dung and cow urine, fresh cow dung and cow urine, because it is rich in microbial content. So that's the base. And then they add other things like jaggery, or what is more popularly known as brown sugar, or aloe vera, lentil flour, buttermilk, basically fermenting agents. So that's what it uses. And so there's the microbial content, and you add fermenting agents to that, and the microbial content literally explodes exponentially within that substance. And then you take that, and they do simple, it's rather simple. They do three things. They treat the seeds, they treat the soil, and they treat the plants. When I say treat the plants, it basically takes them to integrated pest management. So there are no chemical pesticides. So this is what they use. They use sprays made up of natural substances. They use pheromone traps. They use blight-colored gumboards. They use scarecrows, all those things. And despite the fact that they haven't used any synthetic pesticides, there are a lot of fields that have been doing it for 5 years already. And their crop has never failed, not once.
So this is a purely symbiotic relationship with nature. You just
absolutely. So the cow, then the cow and the bullocks and other animals actually have a life beyond their productive life as we conventionally see it. Okay, if the cow is not giving milk anymore, the cow is useless to me. Not anymore. because urine in some villages sells for roughly 30% of the price of the milk.
And this is used in agriculture.
This is used in natural farming.
Nice.
That's the main substance they use. Urine is perhaps by volume the largest or the most important substance that is used in natural farming. And a cow urinates way much more than it gives you milk. So at some level, the cow's milk, the value in price of the cow's milk and the urine would perhaps compete with each other.
Yeah, makes sense. It's but do you think this kind of natural farming, we've only spoken about it in being in the food crop. Now, as a fashion designer, I'm always looking at processes in my system and how I can mitigate like carbon for, the carbon footprint, whether it's like the print or whether it's the manufacturing. But I'm always baffled by the fact that I cannot trace where the seed comes from. And that is something which I have absolutely no clue, from the seed to the textile or the seed to the fiber. But it would be really great if we could probably get this sort of regenerative farming or natural farming done onto textiles or the cash crops, or what fashion designers could probably look into and say, yes, this is how we can take it forward. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, interestingly, Andhra Pradesh is one of the largest cotton growing regions of the country in India. They have hundreds of thousands of hectares under cultivation of cotton, because Andhra Pradesh is also home to one of the largest black soil deposits in the country. Which is what you need for growing cotton. And that's there. They have done actually a partnership with IDH, the Global Sustainable Trade Initiative, which would be off-taking, if I'm not mistaken, 50,000 tons of cotton over the next few years, and that process has already started. And the cotton was tested, and it came back as absolutely clean of any chemicals.
And this is the seed from Andhra Pradesh itself. It's not GMO.
This is the natural farming work in Andhra Pradesh.
Nice.
They're doing that already. And also I would strongly recommend to your viewers to check out something called Storybird.
Storybird.
So, Storybird is an app developed by one of the partners of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. So what Storybird does is that it partners with farmers, and at no cost to them. It actually, so let's say you like a good meal in a restaurant. So you order a dish, and there will be a QR code. So once you scan the QR code, the Storybird basically stands for the bird as it flies and tells you the story.
Nice.
So it'll show you pictures of the farmers that grew whatever it is, or the fishermen that caught the fish perhaps, and then where was it stored, how did it travel, who certified the sustainability, and how did it end up on your plate. So something similar could happen with the clothes as well.
True.
So the moment you scan the QR code in the label, it tells you is it sustainable or not.
And it tells you
So that's something.
Yeah.
And Storybird is actually being integrated in Andhra Pradesh. So the company that is doing it is a bunch of very young and imaginative entrepreneurs. It's a company called Producers Market, which again is a partner of GASP, and so they are a partner of the natural farming program in Andhra Pradesh, both helping with market access so that you can buy things directly from the producer, no matter where you are on the planet, thereby bypassing all these profit-making, rent-seeking middlemen that actually leave the farmers impoverished while enriching themselves, because they have access to the world's markets. So here is a tool and an entity that actually brings the best of producers to the best of consumers. And the producers can then get all the benefits for the hard work they do.
True. And I think this is a very important tool that even us fashion designers can use.
Absolutely. Please take a look.
Yeah, when it comes to like tracking and actually getting, and we can also get the farmers out onto the global market, so people know where and how this cotton was made, and it was made in Andhra Pradesh, and how they kind of made it sustainable.
I mean, it will be a great idea. Maybe it has already happened. is that, next time you have a show, let's get the cotton and the cloth from Andhra Pradesh and do the storyboard. And then, after the models have walked the ramp, let's put up on video the farming women that actually produce the cotton.
Exactly.
That's
the
they are the true models, No, but they are the true models.
That's true. And that's the transparency we need. And that's what the fashion industry is really vying for. Yeah, so that's perfect. So if we have the storyboard is something I'm definitely going to take a look at. And another thing, we had a brief discussion about the the art that some of the communities have, and we have also kind of spoken that there are a lot of designers are taking it onto the global front, but we also need this kind of shift of mindset when it comes to like the consumers and also designers, not just looking at making a product, but seeing how they can help the communities and bring them into the forefront when it comes to the environment. So what is it that I want to hear it from you. What do you think could be one of the biggest paradigm shifts? I cannot say biggest, but one of the paradigm shifts, not required just from us, but also from the governments and the policy makers to get all this happening and to get people to understand and also move forward towards regenerative agriculture and regenerative life and circularity as a whole?
Well, I think, what is missing is the connection, So that's the truly sad thing in the current day world, is we are missing the connections. When we sit around a restaurant table and we have a good meal, we have zero understanding of what really happens, how the food was produced. Eisenhower famously said that he was perhaps talking to a bunch of agricultural policymakers, and he said the closest you have been to a plow is a pencil, and you have been thousands of miles from a cornfield. What would you know about agriculture? So that's the reality, So we have no connection. We have no gratitude for people that produce our food, that keep us alive. As we have no gratitude for Mother Nature, that gives us the fresh air and the clean water, and we keep destroying it, believing that there are unending sources of water and air that we can keep using and discarding. So we really need to start doing three things. And it starts with gratitude. First, the feeling of being grateful that we are alive, that we have a life, a conscious life that is better than numerous species on the planet, that we are able to think, that we are able to create. But that should be used to actually not only better ourselves in terms of our thinking and understanding and what we contribute to the betterment of the planet, but all the other species. And that's what we don't do. So being grateful is the first thing. And showing understanding that we cannot draw from nature beyond its threshold of regeneration. When we say regenerative agriculture, that's exactly what it means. If you go to let's say a virgin rainforest, nobody has ever put a pinch of fertilizer there. And it is one of the most, perhaps the best living, breathing spaces on the planet now. And it thrives and survives because humans haven't happened to that part of the forest. So when you do the same with agriculture, you don't put chemicals in it because we hardly even understand what microbes do for the food system.
True.
By putting chemicals, we're just trying to find a link. Oh, okay, I put nitrates, so this happens to my rice. I put urea, this happens to my paddy. Or I put phosphates, this happens to my vegetables, whatever. But we are never looking at what happens to everything else under the ground. The millions of species that actually keep us alive. So that's the second thing, a heightened understanding. And the third thing is taking responsibility. A problem created by 8 billion people is not going to be solved by a few governments and a few corporates, because then you are putting too much in the hands of too few, and then they produce dodgy signs, they tell us lies, and their present rhetorics and false binaries, because they have to win elections every 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, or 5 years. And so let us not leave our fate in their hands. Let us take our fate into our own hands and look around and see what is it we can change. Can I flip the switch when I walk out of a room with a light bulb? Can I not waste water when I'm consuming? I have seen it in many times with my good friends in the United States and in many other parts of the well-to-do world, is that you want to eat just 2 more French fries and you order a full plate. Because of course, if you're ordering the restaurant, they'll bring you a full plate. They're not going to 2 pieces. And then you have 2 and you leave the rest on the table.
Very true.
But if I just told myself, hey, by trying to eat 2 more, I'll be wasting 100 more fries. So let me not have those 2. I've eaten enough, and next time perhaps. So that will prevent us, or be very mindful what I'm ordering as a package. How many dishes am I ordering? What is my normal consumption quantity? Can I really finish this? Maybe I should order 1 less. There are 1,000 ways of doing it. Many times we have hundreds of clothes hanging in our basement. And we wear them once or perhaps never wear them. We just buy them. And there was a study that says that if you take out the toys in the basements that have never been opened, by the way, in the developed countries, that will be good enough to provide very good toys to 500 million children worldwide. So that's the reality. We keep consuming as if there's no consequence.
True.
And so we really need to become responsible as people, because it's not called anthropogenic climate change without a reason. We are the anthropos. And we really need to change behavior. We need to question everything. Small things like, and I myself am guilty of this. Maybe a decade ago, I would go to a shop and somebody gave me a single-use plastic bag, I would have no questions. But then, then 10 years ago, I changed behavior. I never pick up a plastic bag, no matter who's giving me or what it is for. So I carry a bag when I go to a shop. How difficult is that? When I was growing up as a kid, I always carried a bag when I was going to a shop. So it's going back to basics,
Very true. Very true. And I also remember it was during your tenure at the UN when you had the plastic ban at the UN.
Yes, so when we first started the conversation, so I was in a meeting with the Secretary General and several other Under Secretary Generals and all. And of course, the Secretary General was very receptive and very sympathetic. He said, we must do it. But there were voices in the crowd that were saying, oh, the contractor that runs the food stalls and the facilities is basically worried that this will increase prices, and they haven't catered for it. I said, what might be the increase in prices? Oh, a few cents. I said, we, the people that use the Noble Mayor principle, the Noble Mayor principle is that the UN salaries have to be at the they have to be comparable to the best government salaries in the world, so that government officials from no country that are coming on secondment will find it unpalatable to join the UN. That's the Noble Mayor principle. And so technically, everybody in the UN that has a job there gets the salaries of the best comparable government salary in the world. I said, we want the poor and the impoverished to give up single-use plastic, and we cannot afford a few more cents when we want to go consume something. And then, of course, there was a hushed silence, when I said that. Sometimes these things are not very diplomatic to say, but I was so happy and so proud of my colleagues at the UN in the leadership group that very quickly everybody rallied around. And then, one day I'm walking into because the UNEP office is in the building in front. So when I was walking into the main building, I see this big banner outside, by the way, in bioplastic, which says,
I remember seeing
it's fantastic, there is no plastic.
Yes, I remember seeing
I said, indeed, it is fantastic. And I got a picture of myself right next to the banner, having sent out a spark, because, it was not my decision to make. It was the decision of all those leaders, but sometimes we are too withdrawn and too apprehensive of saying something that might ruffle feathers. But that's your job. You have been put there not because you had some qualifications or you deserve the salary or the perks that come with it, but because the people of the world expect you to bring about paradigm shifts in thinking and action.
Very true.
And we did a lot of things, not just this, when we did a lot of things on sustainable finance, and the Secretary General really took the lead with sustainable finance. I'm so proud of his work in leading the whole climate change conversation. If you look at the UN global agenda on anything, climate change is at the heart of the conversation. And that credit goes to the Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General. Between the two of them, they have really changed the conversation at the UN. I mean, we were all helping, but ultimately they are the highest level leadership of the organization, and they have to drive this across the system.
Correct. Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. We're almost reaching the end of our conversation, and you've taken up your...
Thank you, my pleasure.
And your Saturday to have this really, truly educative discussion. I'll never forget the gratitude, understanding, responsibility. I've written down, and the fact that small actions can actually create a huge impact. And I was also very taken in by your last lines that you had written for your Forbes article by the American writer and futurist Alvin Toffler. So I would like to say it because the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot write or read, but those who can learn, unlearn, and learn.
And relearn.
And relearn. So basically, what I have done in this discussion is that I have unlearned what I've learned to relearn. And thank you so much for spurring.
So have I. Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting questions.
Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye.
You too. Have a great day. Bye-bye.